So I know your audience is predominantly a male audience, right? And so, what I would want to leave them with is, as guys, we love competition. We love the thrill of seeking, of fighting for freedom, for like greater glory. And so just remembering that we are the main character, the main hero of our own story. And so instead of applying these concepts about to other people's lives, why don't we take that to our lives and try to improve our own lives, like I say, like level up in your own life, level up those skills that you would in like watching the sports game, like watching your favorite athlete trying to level up, or watching your favorite video game character trying to level up. Apply that to your own life and like become the person uh that you look up to.
I can remember when Pong first came out, that fascination of moving a pixelated paddle across and a square ball from one side of the screen to another. It just thrilled us Gen Xers. And then when Nintendo came out with Super Mario Brothers, the entire gaming landscape changed. Yes, Mario is still pixelated, but the graphics were head and shoulders above Pong. Fast forward to today and the advent of the first person gaming, and it's not a wonder that boys and men have become addicted to their screens. So, what are we going to do about that as fathers? And how can we make a change for our sons and daughters? Before we're going to get into all that, I just want to remind you that if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, a husband, or an entrepreneur, then I encourage you to participate in our Band of Brothers group mentorship program. We're a group of ordinary guys working towards living extraordinary lives. You can find all the information at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members.net. With that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. What was your favorite video game growing up? And how much time did you spend playing it? I don't think there were too many of us that have not played a video game from time to time. And for some, the dream of being the next Tyler Blevins is all it takes for them to get locked onto their video screen for hours on end. But the reality is that very few will ever make that dream come true. And a truer effect is the awkwardness that young men face in developing relationships with girls and other men because they lack the social skills due to their gaming addiction. Well, today, my guest is here to help us find a path to support the young men in our lives. So allow me to introduce my guest. Dr. Agam Dhawan is a psychiatrist who specializes in treating mental illness, so depression, anxiety, ADHD, and especially video game addiction, in male gamers especially. It's his mission to end the gamer loneliness by transforming them from level 100 gamers, men who become worthy of their dream friendships and their relationships. And he shows men that they can level up to their mental health, fitness, fashion, grooming, and social and dating skills in real life, just as the stats in their favorite video game are. Welcome to the show, Dr. Agam. How are things today, bud?
Things are good, Alan. Thank you for having me on.
Man, and when you reached out and we started connecting about being together on this podcast, I just thought about how important this topic is for us to talk on. And we've touched on a lot of different things about, fatherhood and addictions, but we've never really dived into this aspect. And so in our work here at the Awakened Man, we always talk about every one of us being on our own hero's journey, our own quest, so to speak, in life. And so I'd like to ask you to start off about, tell us a time in your life when you knew things needed to change. What did you do about it, and how that experience shaped you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the most salient examples I can think of, I remember in high school, I would come home. This was my routine where I would come home every day after school, go to the basement, have a plate of Oreo cookies, not just one, an actual plate, take it downstairs, be in the complete darkness where it's just the TV, shut the door so no one can hear. I knew my father did not come home until 6 or 7 p.m., which gave me like a 3 to 4 hour of uninterrupted video game time. And so I did this. Like I literally would just play all day, like after school, would play in the evenings too when my parents had gone to sleep. And I didn't really think it was a problem. I was enjoying things. I was a young teen playing all these fantasy games and stuff. And the moment that it hit me that it was a problem was I wanted to go to prom, and there was one girl that I really wanted to with, but I was too scared to ask her out. I was too scared. She was in my class. I could not get the courage to ask her. I hadn't developed the skill like to do that. And then this other guy asked her out, and she said yes. And so I remember going to prom, seeing her with that other guy, and just being like, wow, like that could have been me. I could have been the one with her. I could have been the one dancing with her. And then like when I was going to college, I was like, this is a fresh start. I am not gonna feel this crappy again.
That's crazy, man. I just think about that. And my heart goes out to you, just thinking about, those moments as teenagers. And, I have two sons and they're in their late 20s and, early 30s. And I think about that. I forget now that I'm, so much older, the pressure that resides in young men and wanting to be able to develop those relationships. And we don't, we don't really learn how to do that. And video games have become so powerful in our lives today. And now with virtual reality games and, the continual online streaming, I think it's, the work that you're doing is really going to help and is already helping, thousands of folks out there and families, helping them be able to reclaim their children and get an opportunity for those individuals to raise themselves up as well.
And just to comment on that, I think I love gaming, but I think what's scary about it is, like you said, when back in the 80s, Pong was the main game that was there. Now we have games where these worlds take hundreds of hours to traverse, legitimately hundreds. There's a game that came out, for example, it was called Skyrim in 2011 by Bethesda Studios. And this is a role-playing game, and it has become one of the most popular games of all time. People have logged thousands and thousands of hours in this game because you can mod this world to create however you want it to be. You can have families in this world. You can go on these quests slaying dragons and being a mage, a wizard. So how does real life even compare to such an amazing experience like that?
Yeah, no kidding. And I don't, like I said, by being, I'm 57 this year. So, it's hard for me to comprehend. I see clips and moments of that. And I just, I can remember, like I said, I used this Mario Brothers because that's the era that I grew up in. And I can remember when, when Super Mario came out and Nintendo was upping its game, and there was in that battle for a while there between that and PlayStation, and maybe it still exists today. But I can remember spending hours just, man, I got to get through the next level. It was nothing compared to what the RPG games today and the reality, the emotion within the games. And I can see why can be so addicting, and to hear that they can mod it the way that you just described, it's not a wonder that we can lose ourselves in a fantasy world and not understand the challenge that it's facing us. So is that the biggest problem that young men are facing today, or is there more to it than just that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alan. The way I interpret it is that it is a symptom of a greater problem, right? Kids don't grow up thinking that I'm going to be addicted to video games, or like I'm going to be addicted to drugs or whatever. These are all symptoms of something else. We all have these core desires as human beings: desire for connection, desire for intimacy, desire for love, right? If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like a psychological concept basically developed, at the very bottom of that pyramid, we have basic needs like food, water, shelter. And one of those needs is sex. So sex is one of the needs that is on there. But what's happening is because people are getting so, one of the reasons people are getting so immersed in the virtual world, right? Girls and guys, social media, for example, and again, instance of the virtual world. So because everyone's getting so immersed in there, then people are getting more and more distant because of this. And I think that young men especially are struggling because guys are the ones who have to learn how to take action, learn how to ask women out, learn how to develop the social skills in order to do so, learn how to take rejection, right? These are all skills that young guys have to develop, or else they will not, from a biological level, they will not reproduce. And so that's why I think it's become even more exacerbated. I think it's only going to get worse from here on out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was making some notes there, and I'm just thinking, as you talked about those basic needs, food, shelter, but more important that those core desires. And I'm just wondering, is in your work, are you finding that there's challenges within the family structure that is causing this, or is it more than just that?
That's a good question too. So I think I'll give you an example. So
Yeah.
I remember working with a therapist that I was working with, right? Like when I was going through therapy, and I was discussing my struggles. She was a mid 50s-year-old therapist, female, and I was a young mid 20s male. And I remember like discussing a relationship problem or something that I was having, and she just like stares at me with this blank look, like, and she says, "Oh, that must be awful." But for me, like the way I perceived it, it felt very robotic, right? It felt like she didn't really understand me at all
Mm.
because her experience was completely different than my experience. So similarly tying it to families, I think that what I've seen a lot is that families don't truly understand what's happening with a lot of young men
Mm.
because they had a different time, right? And so what ends up even exacerbating is that they see the kid going to video games, but they think that all video games are bad or they're called like they're shooters or violent causers. And their immediate response is to take that video game away from the kid, thus kind of like perpetuating even further where not recognizing what that game is doing for that kid.
Oh man, that is so profound. What is that game doing? It's filling a void, right?
So
And
it's
go ahead.
going. Yeah, I was gonna say it's more than that. It's a lot more
Yeah.
nuanced, right? So like as we talked about, when we play a game, if I'm playing this game Skyrim, for example, I feel powerful. Like I am a mage. I am slaying these dragons. I am leveling up. If I'm playing a multiplayer game, I am collaborating with these people. I could be getting bullied in school. Girls laugh at me. Guys, the football team bullies me. They shove my head in the locker, whatever it is. Nowadays, it's all cyberbullying. So they talk smack about me on Snapchat where no one can even trace it. But yet now I play this game. I have friends. I have camaraderie. I'm doing this. I'm slaying the boss together with all my friends from like across the world.
Yeah.
So the fact that like nobody gets me is no, like it makes me empathize with these kids so much. Like no wonder they're slipping into depression and anxiety and all that stuff.
Yeah, what a great way to put that and framing that for me. Thank you so much for that. Like I said, being at 58, I'm a bit disconnected. And the other interesting piece about having you on the show is that I have a dear friend of mine whose son is very much into gaming, and he'll, similar to
Mm,
your story, but he will spend day days on end playing and come out enough to
yeah.
be able to feed himself, and that's about it. And I thought it was so important to understand, as fathers, because we are from a different generation, what is it that we can do? How do we support our children when we see this going on? What approaches would you recommend for fathers to be able to take to help reconnect with their children?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Just getting to the fundamentals, right? All kids want to do is to feel understood, right? Have you ever had this experience, Alan, where you talk to your kid about nine different things and they give you one word answers, and then you talk to them about this one thing, let's say sports or baseball, whatever, and they just start spouting off on the moon about like for 20 minutes, and that you barely can get a word in because they're so excited about talking about that thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, because what's happening is that the kid feels understood, he feels like you understand him. One of the fundamental concepts in therapy is that it doesn't matter what kind of therapy we do if the therapeutic alliance is not there. That is the number one thing that separates successful therapists and clients from unsuccessful therapists and clients, right? And so similarly with, right, a father trying to connect with his sons, the father, what he can do is understand what if that kid enjoys gaming, like what he enjoys about it, what does he get from that, right? And then even partake in that activity with him. And so once that kid feels that he has that connection with his father, then he'll be a lot more open to suggestions like, hey, are you sure, like you might be gaming a little bit too far here, do you think we could replace this with something else? And the kid will be much more willing to engage in that conversation because he feels heard and understood.
Man, I just love that about, that piece about, really getting in and having a conversation with our sons about the game and what they're enjoying about it, and how it, for lack of a better term, I guess I'm going to use the word fulfill them. And then, stepping into it, even though we know that, it's not something that necessarily we want to do, but I think what you're talking about is really about rebuilding that connection, because I think as fathers, we can tend to be a bit harsh, and we have a certain idea of what we want our sons to grow up to be.
Right.
And they don't fit into this perfect little mold that we've created.
Right.
And I think what's happening is we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we end up by losing, in air quotes, losing our kids to us, because they struggle with understanding where we're at, just as we struggle with where they're at. So
yeah, absolutely. And I can give you a really good example of
that'd be
this.
great.
Yeah, I knew a guy in college, and so I went to college in Alabama. And so a lot of people were from smaller towns from very religious backgrounds. And so this guy was raised absolute to the hilt Christian, attended church every Sunday, went to Sunday schools, had to go through all the different, I don't know, like not rituals, but customs that they had growing up, right?
Yeah.
And he gets to college now, and he had felt like he had been restricted, like no drinking, no drugs, no partying, no talking with the opposite sex, like all of that kind of thing. And so when this kid got to college, his attitude was, F you, mom and dad, I'm going to do the complete opposite. So got heavy into smoking weed, got heavy into drinking, was having unsafe sex and all of these kind of things. And so I saw this one kid, and I saw the trajectory he went down.
Yeah.
I also saw this other guy who his parents had never forced him to go into religion, but there was just kind of something that they were like something they did, and that he went to church occasionally, but they never forced it on him. But yet, when he was in college, actually recruited me. We started going to our campus ministry together because he was interested and he wanted to explore it more on his own and what that was like. And so it's something that he started pursuing a lot further and into his own life. And it brought him and his family together as well.
Yeah.
And so,
Go ahead.
go on.
Yeah. I was going to let you finish your thought there. It was really good.
Yeah, so the point is that like the more, especially with kids, they're in teenagers, they're in the life stage where they're trying to rebel. And so the more that parents try to force their ideals on their children, the more the kid pulls away because they're trying to discover their own identity. Whereas if the kid is allowed to discover those things on their own and is encouraged and nurtured, parents might find that they might even just gravitate to what they want all along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a parent, I can say that my experience is that unfortunately, we tend to measure ourselves by how well our kids do, or how well they handle themselves in life. And I think that's also a big part of the problem, is that when, again, I mentioned this earlier, when we put this tight frame, this box around our children, it's so difficult for them to be able to really grow and expand. And what are we truly afraid of? They're not, if we allow them to explore safely, then they get an opportunity to find the answers for themselves. Mm-hmm. But if we overprotect it, and be rigid. I'm the eldest of 5, and I can tell you, I had all the rules on me. But by the time the youngest came in, mom and dad figured out, okay, that's probably not the best way to go about it. And everything is fine. But it's interesting as we see how life ultimately evolves, that how we parent and how we stay connected to our kids is really key, especially today in this, in the topic that we're dealing with, especially with mental health. And so I wanted to ask you, what is it that maybe we're not understanding, or we're getting wrong about male mental health today, that we really need to get clear on?
Yeah. So the number one thing, I think, is not understanding young men's true internal realities and desires. Right. And so what I mean by that is, as young guys, we want to feel powerful. We want to feel respected. We want to feel desired. We want to feel like we are conquering things. And so a criticism that I've had about the general advice, oh, just go to therapy, oh, just talk your feelings out, is that it tends to be a very feminized approach to problem solving, right? If you look at when a group of women get together, right, the way they spend time is they spend time by talking about things and talking about their problems. Whereas when men get together, they spend time doing things, going hunting, fishing, playing video games, playing sports, playing basketballs. And it's not knocking either side. It's just these guys, each biologic gender tends to process things, emotions, conflict differently, right? We see when guys get mad at each other, they wrestle, they tussle, they fight, they might punch each other, but then like afterwards they're good. And then whereas like ladies don't usually fight like that in a physical sense, right? They're just more psychological and word-based. So my point being is that understanding that like this is what young men want to feel. Like we want to feel desired, powerful, attractive, these things, just even understanding that and not shaming guys for wanting that, I think would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really appreciate about what you're saying there is that, being in the men's personal development area, the work that I'm doing, I see that the most successful programs are those ones that, for men, that incorporate I'll call it rites of passage, the experiential aspect of the work. Mm-hmm. It still has a talking component. It still has that sharing aspect of it, but it's really about the experiential piece. And so then I think back to this as we hone in on our topic today about what are those experiences that as fathers we can create for our sons, to your point, to bring them, to help them feel powerful, respected, and desired. And so, do you have any ideas on that, in that aspect of it, about what are some things that as fathers we can do?
That's a really good question. I liked what you brought about with the rites of passage. We know in all these ancient societies and tribal cultures, they always had that level of rite of passage, right? Yeah. And have you ever read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So something that really stood out to me, I remember when reading it, that I thought was so clever, was that when the rich dad wanted to teach his children about money, right? He did not say like, here you go, here's $5,000 or whatever. He gave that kid $5,000 and said, okay, like this is yours, invested in the stock market. And so you get what you get. If you get more, then like that's what you get. But if you lose it, then that's what you lose it. Like that's your spending money. So figure out how to invest it wisely. Something my father used to do was I would have a set limit of gaming where I would have 1 hour, let's say 1 or 2 hours per day. And if I wanted to exceed that, let's say on weekends, I could. But what I had to do was I had to research a specific topic. Let's say how a carbonator or like a capacitor, like an electricity capacitor works, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I had to research a topic and then describe that topic to him. And by describing that topic to him, then I earned the privilege of playing an extra 30 minutes of gaming. And so what that taught me was that to get a reward, you have to put in some struggle, right?
Yes.
And so oftentimes, when we see these kids with struggling with gaming, they might not have that real struggle that they're putting towards. They're putting it towards the game, and so like that's how you get a kid to feel powerful, respected, and because by putting challenges on him that are achievable and encouraging them through that.
Geez, I love that. That's outstanding. Yes, because it gets them to, they're still using the same parts of their brain, their physiology, because they're going to get in and involved in something, and it expands them, right? Expands their ability to think differently and to use this, like some of the concepts that they're playing in, with video gaming in another way. And then so, I really like how we can do that as fathers and really encourage, our children.
Absolutely.
You know, obviously there's an opportunity where we need to figure out how we can stop being addicted to video games. What is your work? What have you found from your work in this area? Is there a formula, a recipe, so to speak, on how to help our children stop the addiction to video gaming?
Yeah. So I liken it similar to addictions with, let's say, alcohol or tobacco, right? There's some people who are, let's say, hooked on alcohol, who they quit. Like the approach for them is to just quit like cold turkey. And like they say, I'm sober for 10, 15, whatever years, right? But then there's other people who may have had a problem before, but now they incorporate it much more responsibly. Like they can have a drink on the weekends, wine with their wife without feeling the need to overindulge, right? And so it's because what they have done is that they have taken that the other time that they used to spend drinking, and they've gone other hobbies with it, right? Other things that they spend their time with. We say in addiction psychiatry is that for every action or for every behavior that you're trying to eliminate, you have to replace it with another behavior. We can't just cut it out if there's nothing else to replace it with. That's why we see people jumping from, let's say, alcohol, tobacco, or one drug to the other drug. And so what I've found that really works with people is that if we can identify, okay, this is what you're doing, right? Identifying the pain that's caused with gaming, because there is always a pain. And I think to make any kind of change, you need emotional pain. It's like the person who smokes for 50 years and then he has a heart attack, realizes he can't go to his granddaughter's wedding, and then quits cold turkey the next day. Because that pain, that physical pain too, but that emotional pain of I can't make it to my granddaughter's wedding is enough to instantly sap that. So the first step is realizing, okay, what is the pain that you're having, right? So that's the core. Like what's the pain of staying with gaming? Because if you don't feel that pain, then no one's ever going to change. And so once we feel that pain, then we have to decide, okay, what direction do we want to go from? We want to get away from here, but do we want to go here? Do we want to go here? Do we want to go here? And so then it becomes about identifying, okay, what goals do you have for yourself? Are you trying to go into college, for example? Are you want to be an architect? Do you want to go to the gym and become muscular, but you've always just put it off for so long? Like, what kind of desire do you have? And then linking that, okay, how can we feel this pain and use that pain to feel us towards the desire that we want to go to?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put that together. I like that. And we will move more from pain than we will towards a pleasure, right? And so
Absolutely.
making that change, I think that's great. And I like how you talked about not just eliminating something, but replacing it with another piece, right? And
Did you want to hear like a really good story that
absolutely,
summarizes that point?
absolutely.
Yeah, so there was I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember hearing the study and just thinking, wow, that makes everything come into context. So there was a study where they had rats, and with the rats, they had attached a pressure sensor to them on their tails to see how fast they pulled away from the sensor, right? And so in front of the rats, they put a piece of cheese or bait. And let's say the rats pulled the sensor at a pressure of 10, right? As an example. Then they had the piece of cheese, but they put a cat behind the rats to see how fast the rats pulled away from that. And that pressure was like 50 or something, like magnitudes bigger.
Yeah.
Really like solidifying for me that the pain is much more of a strong motivator than motivation for pleasure.
Oh, what a great study for sure. It just totally
Mm-hmm.
outlines how we want to move forward. We talked about a little earlier about, some of the work you're doing in helping young men, overcome some mental illnesses. And some of them that we touched on, we talked about, depression, anxiety, ADHD, but what are you finding are the most common mental illnesses that young men and gamers especially are having?
Yeah, one of the ones that really stood out to me that I did not expect was ADHD.
Hmm.
And so I'll give you a story about how I really kind of came to that realization. So I had a side moonlighting job where I was working with the prison population. And so I would interview a lot of these inmates, and something that a lot of them told me was that they were diagnosed with ADHD, but either they never got treatment or their parents never wanted them to get treatment, or they tried, but they failed, something like that, right? And so I'm interviewing them in jail. And so, of course, the first time, maybe the second time, I think, okay, like maybe this guy's just trying to get some stimulants, Adderall, that kind of deal, because that's very common in the prison population. But then, like, I kept hearing all these people say that. Like, all these inmates were saying the same kind of thing. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. And so I did a deep dive into ADHD. And so it turns out that it's not just a lack of concentration. One of the biggest things about ADHD is the impulsivity piece. Essentially, what it is a lack of connectivity in our frontal lobes, which is the part of our brain that's responsible for critical thinking, right? And so that's the last part of the brain that develops in teenagers. It fully matures at the age of 25. And so keep in mind, so teenagers, they have a frontal lobe that's not fully developed, that's responsible for critical thinking. So that's one thing. And then on top of that, if they're having issues with like brain connectivity, focusing, and of course, social media like worsens all that, all the TikTok scrolling and things, right? But then if you have that impulse where you literally just hop from thing to thing to thing, you can't focus, you can't concentrate. Now it becomes much more harder to concentrate on the things that you're supposed to concentrate on as a teenager, as a young man, right? School, work, these kind of productive things. But something like gaming, which is so uh, easy to do because it's very low stimulus, or it's high stimulus but low effort, it's very, very easy for the ADHD brain to hyperfixate on that because it's like an impulsive thing to do, and it doesn't require as much frontal lobe function, the critical thinking function, to focus and to pay attention to it rather to that than it would to, let's say, study or do work.
Hey, that makes sense. It's a good thing I stuck with Tetris and I didn't get into the RPG games. The Tetris either.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, it's like the way I equate it is you can use all of these, just like people can drink responsibly, you can still play games responsibly.
Sure.
You realize the impact that it has, and you're able to curtail it within a certain boundary or parameter that you set. And
Yeah.
like that's the important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And great point to, bringing that through. We're not saying here, this conversation is about eliminating total gaming. Now, there may be points through the healing process that might be a requisite in order to be able to in a most health way, I'll move away from that addiction piece, but it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily need to be a complete elimination of it. And so that's a great nuance that, that we can take away. No,
Yeah, no,
go
absolutely.
ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I agree with that 100%. And I think that's where the concept leveling up in real life comes from, is recognizing, okay, like there are positives from gaming mentalities that we can take to better our own lives. Gaming has been some of the most fun that I've ever had. I still connect with my friends regularly through gaming, going to conventions and stuff. It's a great way to connect, playing online games. I'm sure you've noticed as we get older, we don't keep in touch with our friends nearly as much. And so, but if we organize, hey, let's have this game night once every 3 weeks, once a month, it's a way for all the old friends to keep in contact too. You can bring people in for social game nights, like Friday nights, we play something together. Just the other day, I was playing Monopoly on the game board because we didn't, or on the TV because we didn't have the board, but we had the video game with us. So we literally played Monopoly on the TV. So it was a great way for like all of our family to stay connected and enjoy each other's company too.
I was just going to say that reminded, as you were talking about it, it reminds me of my family was really big into board games and card games. And so, as during my teenage years, that's what we would spend on a Friday or a Saturday night. It was just, I have a few buddies that come over and
Uh-huh.
the kitchen table with all the, interleaves we put in, and some game or card game or board game was out, and we'd play for hours on end. My parents would be involved, and it's just
Yeah.
today now, like you said, just play Monopoly on the screen. But you're still together. It's the social aspect of it. And when you get to do that with a group of friends, I think that's just a real positive way to keep gaming in our lives, and really bring in the family unit back together
Mm-hmm.
again. So I love that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think another thing that adults and most older people don't understand is, like, for example, there's no bias against watching movies, correct? Yet gaming has some of the best storylines known to mankind, some of the best. For example, if you've heard this show, HBO, called The Last of Us, you may have heard of it, but it broke records. It's more popular than Game of Thrones. It got more viewership than Game of Thrones did. And this first season, and the entire show, the storyline is based off of a video game that came out 10 years ago in 2013. Literally the entire storyline. And now mainstream audiences are like, where's this been? Like, this show's amazing. Like, why don't we see shows like this? And we're like, yeah, we do. It's just they're in their video game world instead of in your TV.
You just flip the script. And I was just thinking about the music that today's generation will listen to, and I go, hey dad, I want to play this song for you, but have you ever heard this before? It's like, yeah, that was in the 70s or the 80s.
Right.
They've just put a different beat to it or what have you. Just there you go. I was thinking of
Yeah.
Pitbull and some of that. It's like, oh my
You're like,
goodness.
that was our music. We've been doing this long before.
And it's true, the writing behind some of these RPG games is so incredible, and the storylines, and that's what keeps part of the captive being so captive about it, right? And want to be just involved in it, and the decision making. So I totally get why that can
Oh,
it can
incredible.
it can overtake our lives. And so listen, I want to ask you. So I'm going to assume that you're a voracious reader. You wouldn't be a psychiatrist and get your degrees without doing some reading. But what's sitting
Hmm.
on your nightstand today, or what's your favorite book that you've read?
Ooh, the book that really made an impact for me. It was a book I didn't read this year, but I read last year. It's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Wow.
It sounds like you've heard of it.
Yeah, all about the art of negotiation, right?
Art of Negotiation. Yes. And so initially I picked up this book because I wanted to learn how to negotiate a higher salary when I was interviewing for a job. And so it worked. But what I didn't realize was that I could apply the same principle to negotiating with patients too. So
Mm.
if I'm negotiating like about taking their medication, for example, if I can, because the whole book is about how to use empathy, how to make the other person feel heard, feel connected, so that way they do what you want them to, right? So like in his Voss's case, the the hostage holder, what do you call it? Like the captor, the bad guy, right? They surrender to Voss because they feel like he hears them, he gets them, that they will be safe with him
Yeah.
negotiating. He doesn't do the hardball tactics. He empathizes with them, uses reflective statements to make sure the other person feels heard. So similarly in patient interactions, if the patient feels like they can trust me, then they're willing to take their medication. They're willing to discuss any issues that come up with the meds that they might have. In therapy, they might share secrets with me that they've never shared with any other doctor before, any other psychiatrist before, because they feel that I'm the one they connect with, right? It applies to parenting as well. If you can negotiate with your children to where the kid does what you want them to do and they feel good about it, not that they feel forced, then like you've literally just unlocked the secret for persuasion.
Absolutely. What a great book. I truly enjoyed that one. And you're absolutely
Fantastic.
right. It was all about empathy and how to place ourselves. And of course, Chris had to deal with lots of pretty high intense situations.
Absolutely.
So throughout your life now, you've come across lots of people, maybe a few mentors in your life. What's been the best piece of advice that you've been given, and how has that served you?
Well, let me reflect on that for a second.
Yeah, for sure.
So I can't remember where I first heard this advice, but I remember the concept. And it was basically that you control everything that's in your life. But I read that book, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and that really solidified it for me. Like, oh, okay, like this makes sense of how I've been thinking all along. And the reason I come to adopt that mindset was I work with patients who had trauma, especially in my residency training, and I often found that these patients often had a blaming mindset. They hated their victimizer. They would, hold on to these grudges about them. And the one phrase that I used to say to my patients was that the trauma is not your fault. So again, it's not your fault. However, it is your responsibility. Meaning that, like, what's done is done. The shit's already happened, but now it's up to you to ultimately pick it up because no one else is going to do it for you. Right. And so I've tried to live my life that way as well too, like extreme ownership. Like I am in control of everything. If nothing is my fault, I take complete responsibility for it. I found this concept really helpful in my residency training when I was working with nurses and like other staff members, like administrative assistants, et cetera, people who are older than me. I was 26 years old when I started residency. And I was working with people who were 40s, 50s, and they would complain about stuff that happened in the hospital. They would complain about things with patients. They would get mad at me.
Mm.
But I knew that if I lost control, since I was the doctor, then all hell would break loose. So I had to take, like, everyone else could lose control and that's fine, but I could not do that. So I had to understand my feelings and say, okay, how can I act in a way to make sure everyone I'm working with feels heard for, accounted for, and I'm like managing them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And so that's where that concept of extreme ownership, that I'm responsible for everything in my domain, like really solidified for me.
yeah, absolutely. What a great and what a great, virtue and model to live by, because truly when you're in leadership roles, that is so key about how we respond to the adversity, the challenges that are faced, really sets the tone for the rest of the people that are around us, whether we recognize the direct influence or the, even more importantly, the indirect, the ones that are maybe watching and paying attention to how you're handling it, especially as fathers and parents. Our kids will
Yes.
do what we do more than they'll do what we say. And
Yes.
when we
Yes.
can come understand that to your point, the extreme ownership, makes it goes a long way.
Right. The father who says, "Hey kids, don't smoke," while sneaking out for a cig right after dinner. The kids, they know it's happening.
Yeah.
As much as you hide it, and they just know that. I've seen kids pick up on things like their parents cheating, for example, that like parents had no clue that the kid knew. No clue. And so it all kind of ties together. You're in control of everything in your domain. So like just take responsibility for it and address it as best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. Of everything that we spoke about today, maybe there wasn't something we got a chance to touch on. If there was one thing you'd want our listeners to remember of our conversation, what would that be?
Yeah, for sure. So I know your audience is predominantly a male audience, right? And so, what I would want to leave them with is, as guys, we love competition. We love the thrill of seeking, of fighting for freedom, for a greater glory, right? Whether it's in video games, whether it's in sports, right? Whether it's in movies, we love the hero succeeding, whether it's in anime, whatever our thing is, guys, we all have something like that. And so just remembering that we are the main character, the main hero of our own story. And so instead of applying these concepts about to other people's lives, why don't we take that to our lives and try to improve our own lives? Like I say, like level up in your own life, level up those skills that you would in like watching the sports game, like watching your favorite athlete trying to level up, or watching your favorite video game character trying to level up. Apply that to your own life and like become the person that that you look up to.
What a great way to round out our conversation today. That's just so powerful. I just want to say thank you once again, Dr. Agam, for spending time with me today. And I think we've been able to show that there is support for our sons, and through their gaming addiction and their mental health challenges, that as fathers, when we can become more present and pay attention and really lead by taking extreme ownership, I think we can do a much better service for our children. So if folks were interested in getting a hold of you and participating in any of your work, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can feel, if you feel like what we talked about resonated with you, just send me a message on my website. I have a contact form if you're interested in becoming a client, either for yourself or for your son. Then feel free to schedule a free consult call with me again on my website, and I'd be happy to discuss your concerns with you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to make sure your website's in the show note for today's show, as well as I found you on Instagram and on YouTube. So I'll make sure we'll get some opportunity for people to be able to reach out and get a sense of even greater sense of the work that you're doing. And because I think it's so important and needed in today's environment. So once again, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.